The whole culture war around DEI has been really unfortunate, but it's nothing that's new to us. This is something that we've been paying attention to well before last year's election. In my professional opinion, is really based on a lot of misinformation, a lot of hyperbole, and the politics of grievance, none of which are going to be productive as we try to envision how we create a better, more inclusive, more vibrant tech ecosystem. We are in such a polarized moment where hold true and that you care about everything is being weaponized. And I want to make clear, we're a nonprofit organization. We are not bipartisan. We are nonpartisan. We do not engage in political activity. And I think what's been missing from the whole DEI conversation has been the focus on humanity, on the actual people.
Joey, welcome to Tech Scenes Unplugged.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start from the top. Tell me about Chicago Blend.
Chicago Blend is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was founded back in 2018 by a group of local venture capitalists who were really committed to improving the industry and specifically improving diversity and inclusion in the industry. So our whole mission is really around building a more inclusive venture capital and startup ecosystem for our tech scene here in Chicago. In terms of the work that we do, it's really threefold. First is data and insights. So we publish demographic data, industry reports to better inform the broader public, as well as our industry about what's happening in venture capital here in Chicago. Our second area of work is really around community development, bringing different stakeholders from across the venture and startup ecosystem together. Some of it's just networking, some of it is much more content forward. And our third area of focus, which I suspect we'll get into more later, is around talent. And that's really through our Chicago Blend Venture Fellowship, which is a 4-month program for aspiring emerging professionals who are trying to break into venture capital. We're on cohort 8 right now, and we've helped a number of folks get their get their VC journey up and running. So we're excited to continue that work as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I have tons of questions on all those fronts, but I want to go back a little bit farther. Like, what was your path to Chicago Blend?
Sure, I appreciate that question. So first, I would describe myself as an ecosystem builder at my core. I have an economic development background, spent a number of years working in public sector, higher ed, nonprofits, but there's always been one burning question that has guided me throughout my career, which is how do we make our region stronger? And for me, that question is deeply personal. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, first generation American, and someone who cares deeply about the future of my city. And every time I wrestle with that question of how do we make our region stronger, whether it's now or in my previous roles, I've consistently arrived at the same answer, which is it comes down to access to opportunity. Whether that's access to education, jobs, funding, networks, it's the lack of access that holds so many people back, because lack of access means that not everyone gets the chance to participate in our economy. Not everyone gets the chance to contribute their perspectives. Not everyone gets to put their resources and know how to work. So it limits the growth potential of our region's tech economy writ large. And we see that dynamic playing out in venture capital every day. There are countless talented, venture backable founders that are struggling to raise money, not because their ideas or products aren't good, but because the world of startup investing is so opaque and difficult to navigate, especially for first-time entrepreneurs. So that's where Chicago Blend comes in and why I was so excited to join this organization almost 5 years ago. As mentioned, we're a nonprofit working to break down those barriers. So we focus on inclusion among venture capitalists themselves. Our theory of change is pretty simple. If we diversify who's writing checks, we can diversify who's getting funded. And when investors with different lived experiences and unique perspectives enter the industry, they see other opportunities that others might miss and can direct capital towards founders that are solving real world problems that are oftentimes overlooked.
Yeah. Where do you think this passion for creating opportunity comes from?
I mentioned earlier, my parents, they emigrated to this country from Cambodia. They came here as war refugees. And, so when my extended family dispersed, most of my extended family went to France. My parents were
Mm,
very passionate about wanting to come to the United States. They were able to come here. They were able to build a life here. I was born here in Chicago, and they've never let me forget that this country and this city has offered us so many opportunities. So when I started my career really in the public sector, it really was based on a desire to give back to this country, this city that has given our family so much. But it was really working through my time in government and dealing with people from all walks of life. Because when you're in government, you don't get to pick who your customers are. You serve everyone.
right,
And
right.
it was really through that experience where I saw so many things that frankly frustrated me when it came to why things are the way they are, why the world looks the way it looks, why capital and money flows the way that it flows. And so much of it really comes down to systemic barriers that have been reinforced over many years, over many generations. And what's been so cool, and it's the best part of my job, whether now or in previous roles, is when you are able to remove a barrier and see someone who didn't even believe in themselves that they could do that they could build that company, raise that capital, become a teacher, whatever the case may be. There's something so gratifying about being able to see people achieve their goals and knowing that by removing just a little bit of friction, by providing folks with just a little bit of resource, a little bit of help, how far they're able to go. So that has always really inspired me. So I do think there are deeper roots there, but it really comes down to the work that we see every single day. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here at Chicago Blend.
Let's get into Chicago Blend a little bit more. Like, can you tell me about like some of the things that you guys are doing that are removing those barriers, and maybe like some examples of what you've seen? And
Probably the best example that we have of trying to improve the industry is really by bringing new blood into the industry. Let's get folks who are on the sidelines, who maybe never envisioned themselves working in venture capital, or they thought, I come from humble beginnings, I'm not rich, how can I ever be in a position to support startups and deploy capital? We want to get those people more into the fold. So back in 2022, we received some funding from a Melinda Gates-backed foundation, as well as a couple other philanthropic and corporate donors to help pilot a program, which is now the Chicago Blend Venture Fellowship. But basically, we wanted to see if we brought a cohort of high potential career switchers, people who came to the table with a lot of grit, a lot of unique perspective, but they really wanted to break into VC, which is very hard to do. We designed this pilot to as an intervention to see what are the types of things, what are the forms of support, the education, what are the networks and introductions that they need to best position themselves to get that first gig at a venture capital firm or at a larger investment firm. So that was where things started. The program today, we launched during COVID. So the program, our first cohort looks a little different than it does today, but here's how I would describe our program. It's a 4-month fellowship. We have 10 to 12 fellows at any given time. All of them are career switchers. We have a couple graduate PhD students here and there, but most of them come to us having worked entire full careers in a different industry, a different function, a different sector, but they all got to this place because they are passionate about supporting entrepreneurs and they themselves want to become VCs. So through this 4-month program, we do a couple things. Number one, we provide them with venture finance training. And that's through an online program called VC University. That's through UC Berkeley. They provide great content and support. We provide that for all of our fellows that are accepted into our program. The second thing that we do is we do a lot of forced networking. So just yesterday, we finished off what we call orientation month. So we bring them together in person every week for the first 4 weeks of the program. We provide them with content that they wouldn't get from VC University or from a textbook. And then we have curated networking opportunities where we introduce them to other stakeholders, whether it's angel investors, LPs, VCs, founders, really to give them a well-rounded view and network of the Chicago tech ecosystem. So I mentioned the venture training, I mentioned the networking. A newer innovation that we've brought in is by providing, we pair each of our fellows with an actual VC firm, kind of like an internship within the fellowship, so they can get real hands-on experience. And then finally, we have what we call Blend Talks. It's the capstone event where they get in front of on a stage in front of a room of 100 plus investors, and they give a TED-style talk on some VC issue or tech trend that we know is going to be salient and relevant to that room. And it's kind of an opportunity for them to show off, how smart they are and why these firms should hire them. So we've done 8 cohorts. We've supported 84 fellows. We're in cohort 8 right now. But our big number is that between cohorts 1 through 7, our first 7, more than 90% of our fellows that applied for a VC job got one after the program. Wow. It's not an apprenticeship model. That doesn't exist in VC, not really. But through us leveraging our networks, the relationships that we have with other VC firms having been founded by VCs, as well as the great talent that's coming through our program, it's been really gratifying to see how many of our fellows are now actual investors deploying capital.
That's remarkable. Are a lot of them in Chicago, or are they kind of spread throughout the U.S.?
A lot of them are in Chicago. We also recognize it's not like there's 1,000 VC jobs that opens up in Chicago every year, right? So we also consider it a very impactful win when our fellows get jobs outside of Chicago as well. So we've had a number of fellows get roles on the coast. Certainly encourage that too. But what we want them to do is think of Chicago. They understand Chicago. They know what types of founders are here. And when they're deploying that East or West Coast capital, to think about the middle of the nation too.
Right.
Something else I should also mention, I mentioned earlier that we pair each of our fellows with a VC host firm. We've had more than 40 firms participate. More than 20% of them are firms outside of Chicago, firms outside Illinois. So we know that there's definitely an appetite for really good talent outside of Chicago VC firms too.
Yeah, and what are you looking for in these fellows when you're looking at all the ones that are coming in and trying to figure out what that next group might look like? What are the main things that you're looking for?
There are a couple things that we look for when we're recruiting for fellows. Number one, a couple years of work experience, so we don't work with undergrads. Number two, we want to understand their level of commitment to VC. We get lots of folks who are curious about or want to learn more about VC, and we think that's great. But for this program, it's best suited for those that know they want to get into this industry. They've done that due diligence on their own, and they're committed to it. Other things that we look for, do they come to the table with some form of subject matter expertise? That could be in an industry like manufacturing or healthcare or biotech. That could be in a function like marketing or operations or business development. All of the above are fine. But again, we want someone who has something core that they can hang their hat on. And then other things that we look for, this is kind of where the art and science comes into play, are things like, do we think they're going to be a good member of our community? How do we think they're going to be able to balance, their own workloads with the responsibilities that they have, being part of this very rigorous program and also supporting a VC firm as part of this program? Are they going to support each other? Are they going to give back to the fellowship community? Are they going to pay it forward? And we have some fun questions that we use to prompt for that. But because of our focus on those that are super committed to a career in venture, I think that accounts for why we have such high rates of fellows applying for roles post-program, as well as fellows getting roles.
Right. And I think it must be challenging to get diverse candidates applying, because I think the stereotype is that, I don't picture myself, or I'm not the right person for something like this, or historically I haven't been. What are ways to really break the mold to get everybody to apply, to really create that kind of accelerating of diversity?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I'm going to use a very overused adage, but you can't be what you can't see. And I think that is so true, because oftentimes, and we've heard this from some of our fellows, including some that were maybe shy when they first started, but we saw so much potential in them. But, we've heard this from our fellows, but I've talked to lots of investors that until someone took the time to demystify venture capital, until they were able to meet that one founder or that one investor that took the time to explain that to them, to make that introduction for them, to kind of take them on the journey, they would have never been able to envision themselves in a role like this. And we think that's a big part of the problem. And we know that there's been a lot of interesting science research around this, that, people will opt out. They will self-select themselves out of things all the time. And we see this like even among the genders. Women are much less likely to apply for a job unless they, hit every single required qualification, which to me tells me that they're overqualified. And then oftentimes a lot of men will apply for a job even if they are only hitting 40 or 50% of the qualifications. So there's a bit of kind of confidence in being able to demonstrate the importance of showing that there is a place for you here. So here at Chicago Blend, we certainly try to do that through our work. It's core to our mission, but the work that we do, we don't exist in a vacuum. We are part of a broader tech ecosystem here in Chicago of incubators, accelerators, universities, other nonprofits that are focused on this issue of equity in the tech industry, founder-facing communities, support organizations. We work with all of them because, again, we know that we do not exist in a vacuum. So it's through those partnerships that we're able to find really good people. The other thing that we do is we also look to our partners at the national level. Chicago Blend, we are unique in many ways, but there are other organizations, a lot of them sit at the national level, that are also focused in some way on this issue of diversity, of inclusion in venture capital. Some prominent organizations include Venture Forward. So they're the kind of the foundation nonprofit arm of the National Venture Capital Association. They've been doing really awesome work and research around this issue. There are organizations like Black VC, National Org with a strong Midwest chapter, based of course in Chicago. And they're doing a lot of work to help drive and accelerate the position of Black investors in the industry. There are lots of organizations that we lean on that have Chicago ties that help amplify and help us get the application, get this opportunity out to people. And we're exploring other channels as well. We should be going to, more, we want to be doing things like going to more affinity groups, so think lawyers, associations, groups like that, where we know there might be people who they may not have that direct finance or investing background, but they bring something to the table that's super valuable that could make them a really awesome investor. So those are the ways that we ensure that we are being inclusive, and the burden is on us as an organization to do that outreach to those communities to make sure that they know about this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But as someone that grew up in the Midwest and now lives on the coast, and also I've been in tech since the 90s in the Midwest where I originally started. I do know that there's many vibrant cities across the US where the tech ecosystem's super powerful, super connected, and oftentimes overlooked. And, Chicago, I don't see as overlooked. I know some people may think that, but I don't think Chicago's overlooked. There is so many companies, so many great investors that have come out of Chicago, that are in Chicago. And I did tech scenes in Chicago. I think it might have been like 3 or 4, 5 years ago. It's been a little while. But there was just so many different companies. I just couldn't actually decide. And actually, some of them were very tiny companies at the time and became very large companies now. And it's just great to see that happening and will continue to happen. And the more wins that these cities have, the more money that gets invested in the more companies. And it's just a cycle that really happens. Now, I know that you guys, I believe, benchmarked some data nationally. Can you tell me a little bit of like what you've seen and kind of where Chicago sits within those numbers?
At Chicago Blend, we look at a couple different data sources that really help to inform our work. I'll start with the data that we collect and publish and analyze. So we look at data measuring diversity across venture capital firms in the Chicago region. We also publish a separate report that looks at diversity across venture-backed companies in Chicago. And as is always the case with Chicago, we've got some really bright spots, and we certainly have areas for growth. From a diversity standpoint, Chicago is actually doing better than the nation in some significant ways. We've seen an increase over the past 5 years of women who are working in VC. It used to be about 25%. That number is closer to 35% now. Still a bit ways off from parity, but it's trending in the right direction. When we look at racial or ethnic background, we know that in terms of Black investors, we tend to have a slightly higher percentage. I think the national level, double check me on these numbers, but it's definitely in the single digits. And I know that here in Chicago, according to our last data set, ours was definitely higher. It was probably about 7% in VC. VC employees here in Chicago were Black. So there are definitely some areas that we can be proud of. And I think a lot of that is really a reflection of just our local demographics, our local economy. It's a very diverse city, obviously. You were talking a little bit about Chicago, perceptions of being overlooked. And it might seem weird that, someone from the third largest city in the country is saying that we are overlooked. But when you really dig into the data, there are some ways where founders in our region are definitely being underserved, especially when it comes to capital. So we know that a lot of the firms here in Chicago, capital is global. So they're investing nationally and globally. We certainly encourage them to invest in our local companies, but that may not fit with their thesis, and that's okay. So part of the solution needs to be, how do we bring more capital into Chicago? And when you look at, rankings of, startup cities and whatnot, globally, we're probably about 25th, I think was last year's ranking. Nationally, we're 12th. So we are definitely below in terms of deal activity. We're definitely below much smaller cities, right? Despite the fact that we have a lot of the same assets, access to talent, universities, lots of different industries, all these sorts of things. So we definitely have more work to do. And I think part of that comes from one of our strengths, which is also in some ways a weakness. Chicago has an incredibly diversified economy. There's no single industry that comprises more than 13 or 14% of our local GDP. So we have technologies and awesome companies of all types, right? But when you think of Chicago, it's not like, when you think of New York, you might think of media or finance, or you think of Boston as being the epicenter of all things, life sciences. We don't have any single thing. We kind of dabble in all of those things. And that's good in many ways. But from a perception standpoint, I do think that has hurt us. So when we think about what is it going to take to build a more inclusive ecosystem, to see more deal flow activity, to see more companies getting funding, we know that we need to address those capital flows. The second set of data that we look at, just like a lot of other organizations and folks, we look at what we're seeing nationally as well. We know that, I think according to the NVCA, in Q2, more than half of all VC venture capital funding went to AI, right? So less than half of all the money that's being deployed is going to all the other different technologies and sectors. We have a lot of those here. So, we need to find a little more parity. There's a lot of opportunities that investors are missing because there's kind of this obsession with AI right now, understandably so. But there's a lot more cool stuff that's happening out there too. So we're definitely looking at data points like that. And then finally, the other data points that we look at is, where is the capital actually going in terms of the types of companies that it's funding? We know that it's being more concentrated. There's more follow-on funding available for larger, more established companies that have traction. They have the track record, all of those good things. But that leaves a lot of first-time founders, so those that are raising maybe $5 million rounds or less, that leaves a lot of them out. And that's where so much of the innovation is happening. And we know that a lot of those founders are here because we see them all the time. So to kind of wrap all of this up in a neat bow, there's so much activity, so many awesome startups, problems being tackled, not just in Chicago, but across the entire country, not just on the coast or in the areas that you would expect. And it would be to our regional, our national economies benefit to take a harder look at those companies and make sure that they're getting the resources and capital that they need to grow and scale.
Like I said, some cities feel like they're overlooked, but I think, there's so much power in these cities. And I think actually the community of sometimes some of the smaller cities is stronger than the greater cities. Being here in LA, it feels like there's multiple cities,
Yeah.
right? It's like there's pockets. We have like Culver City, we have Santa Monica. I mean, Orange County seems like a state away. So like it's interesting, but there's very pocketed versus like a community like Chicago where it feels like it's very woven together and really woven together in a really good way. I want to talk about DEI a little bit, and I know that you have a lot of experience in that. And I think one of the things I'm trying to remember the way that you said it is we need to put humanity back into DEI. I think is what you told me. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
The whole culture war around DEI has been really unfortunate, but it's nothing that's new to us. And this is something that we've been paying attention to well before last year's election. The backlash to DEI, in my professional opinion, is really based on a lot of misinformation, a lot of hyperbole, and the politics of grievance, none of which are going to be productive as we try to envision how we create a better, more inclusive, more vibrant tech ecosystem. That comment about the need for humanity, I would extend this just more broadly. We are in such a polarized moment where, who you voted for, the issues that you hold true and that you care about, everything is being weaponized. And DEI is certainly one of those things. And I want to make clear, we're a nonprofit organization. We are not bipartisan. We are nonpartisan. We do not engage in political activity. We stay away from that stuff. We certainly advocate for issues that are relevant to our work. But we are truly a nonpartisan organization. And I think that's essential for us to be inclusive, right? And I think what's been missing from the whole DEI conversation has been the focus on humanity, on the actual people, because DEI often gets distilled to this myth, which is we are going to hire someone who is less qualified than you because they're the right color or gender and you are not. That's where that whole meritocracy myth comes into play. And that is so just patently wrong. And it flies in the face of my entire experience with people who've come up the ranks and have found, some level of success and prominence, When we think about DEI, we need to really break it down to understand what its purpose is, what it means, and how it impacts people. Because at the end of the day, DEI is really a set of best practices for running a good organization. If you are trying to, whatever your business problem is that you're trying to solve, whether you are looking for new forms of capital, whether you are trying to find untapped markets, whether you're trying to make a new hire, there is something within the DEI toolbox that's going to be relevant for you, that can help you advance your business. And certainly we believe in DEI just because we think it's the right thing to do, but we know that there's such a strong business case. And when you actually break down those three letters into what they actually mean, then I think it becomes a lot less scary. So I want to break that down really quick. And I'm going to use a definition of DEI that McKinsey uses and we like. So diversity refers to representation among people, among your employee base. How many women, how many people of color, how many self-identifying LGBT folks, that sort of thing, right? So that's really just more of a count. That is representation. That is what diversity is. Equity is something a little different. Equity refers to how do your employees experience working at your company. So as an example, is it clear to all employees what is required of them in order for them to get a raise, in order for them to get a promotion? Or is it kind of this person is really close with that manager and they make the decision? I would argue that the former is better than the latter. And the former is a perfect example of good DEI practices, where we should have uniform policies and fairness and an equal chance for people to advance in an organization. That policy should be clear to everyone. And at no point did we say anything about race, ethnicity, gender, blah, 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 right? So equity is really around, do your employees understand? Do you have the processes, procedures, policies in place to ensure that it is an equitable workplace where everyone has equal chance to succeed, opportunity to succeed? And inclusion really is more of a cultural norm. It is, do your employees feel that they can come to work as themselves. Again, I'm not saying anything about race, ethnicity, or gender, which and it's really race, ethnicity that's where people tend to zero in on. But whether you are someone who is really into sports and that's like half your identity, whether you're someone with a ton of piercings, right? Do you have a place at this company? Do they embrace you? So when you look at all of those things and actually talk about it that way, all of a sudden everyone's for that. They're like, yeah, we want all these things,
Right.
Wheelchair ramps. That is DEI in action. Find me someone who's going to get on your podcast and say we shouldn't have wheelchair ramps, and I will happily spar with them. But that's another example of DEI, and I think all of that, the humanity piece, right? How we are all experiencing this world, all of that's being lost because it's not politically expedient, and also it doesn't fit neatly into one single soundbite. DEI takes work, just like organizational development, professional development takes work. These are all tools.
Right. Everything important done right takes work. Really does.
Agreed.
Yeah. And, I'm a big advocate of diversity. I mean, I named the company Collective Genius. And actually that came out of a former co-founder and I both coming up with one word and putting them together and being like, oh, that was it, which is, that in action. But, I really think putting minds together, a diverse set of minds together, always is the best route. It's always the best route, and you get the best outcomes with that. And I think that's really important. I think humanity and bringing humanity together and working together is so important. And that's why I think it's so important what you're doing and the leading the way and building these ecosystems, I think is so important. I think you and I both talked about our friend Brad Feld and his book, Startup Communities. Is such a nice refresh on rethinking about how to build these communities. When you think about ecosystems, and you have a lot of experience in this, what are some of the pillars that you build towards when building an ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, number one is an acknowledgement of the ecosystem that's already here. And I talked a little bit about that earlier. And really understanding what are the unique gaps that we have, the problems that are facing founders, that's facing the business community here in Chicago. It's not necessarily going to be the same here as it is in LA or in Detroit or in New York, right? So I think something that is essential, something that must be a pillar of any approach to community development, ecosystem building, needs to take into account an honest audit of what's on the ground, what's working and what's not. And we've certainly done that, and that has really helped us kind of define where we fit into this broader tapestry of support organizations. But when I look at a city or a region or an ecosystem, there are always common themes of what makes for a really great startup ecosystem. Brad Feld talks a lot about this, but I had a chance to see Steve Ballmer, former CEO of Microsoft, speak here in Chicago. This was back in 2013. And he listed some of the things that are really essential for a thriving ecosystem. So I'm going to copy his and amend it a little bit. But there are a couple of things that you need. Number one is you need some anchor companies, some anchor corporations, right? We have 30 plus Fortune 500 companies right here in Chicago. So we certainly have that. Number two is certainly access to talent. We have tons of universities, including Research One universities within a quick bike ride of where I'm sitting here in downtown Chicago today. So we know that we've got that steady stream of new innovation, new talent. Number three, you got to have capital. And we've talked a lot about that today, so I won't belabor that. Number four, you have to have a city where people want to live that has the amenities that caters to a really great lifestyle. And then number five, and this is direct from Steve, you need a little bit of luck, which obviously we can't control, but we'll try to solve for the other four things. And when you look at Chicago, and I would say this about so many Midwestern cities, I love Chicago, but I am also a Midwesterner, and I feel that in my bones. When you look at a city like Chicago, we have a lot of those things here already. Great universities. There's great cost arbitrage because you can live in the cost of living here is a lot more affordable than it is in a lot of other tech ecosystems. There's great innovation happening, great restaurants, tons to do, especially this time of year. So we have a lot of those things, but where we are struggling, and again, we've talked a lot about that today, is really on that capital piece. And that is I think the essential opportunity where we need to really pull those barriers down so that more founders, more people can get that funding. I really think that's what's essential.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's really essential. And you are doing something to change that, I think. So I think that's so awesome. Um, what you're doing is very difficult. You could have chosen something much easier to do with your life. And I always feel like very similar to founders. I think that sometimes they feel like they don't actually make the choice of what they're doing, but they're pulled towards it. I think it's really a calling. Oftentimes, jobs like this, when they're hard as what you're doing, when you feel like that uncertainty or things that are really hard, how do you keep yourself moving forward and the others around you moving forward in those tough times?
This is going to sound very cheesy, but I think gratitude is so important here. I've been in this role for going on 5 years now. So I've had a little bit of time to test some things out, made a lot of mistakes along the way, learned a lot along the way. So certainly I'm more confident today in what we're building and where we want to go as an organization. But in terms of how I stay motivated, you got to look at a couple things. I'll start with maybe the more inspirational thing, which is I'm going to borrow a very popular phrase about Chicago from Daniel Burnham, the architect, built the White City here in Chicago, all that good stuff. But he said, make no little plans, and we are a city, I think, of big dreamers, but also pragmatic doers. And I find myself kind of on both sides of that fence. Of we have a big, audacious goal of building the most inclusive, the strongest tech ecosystem in the world. I really want that for Chicago. But we are also very aware that it takes a lot of that hard work, that a lot of it is not sexy. A lot of it is like hand-to-hand combat. It is championing one hire, training one fellow, doing the hard work of gathering data. All of these things are so important. So I think gratitude is one of those ways that I kind of keep myself in check. You got to take stock of the people that you've been able to help and the impact that it's had in their lives. Take stock of the team that you've built. Take stock of all the mistakes you've made and what you've been able to learn from them. All of those things, I think, just help me stay motivated just as a person, but certainly as a professional as well. So I try to really focus on that.
Yeah, everybody talks about mistakes a lot, and I think making mistakes is probably one of the strongest ways to learn, right? Because it hurts, right? It hurts sometimes, and I think it can be really powerful. I think when we go into roles and do things that we haven't done before, leading from the front, you're going to make mistakes because you always have a bias for action. You're always moving forward. And what was one thing getting into Chicago Blend, maybe that you learned, or maybe it was a mistake that you had, that would be beneficial for someone else to hear, where maybe you went in thinking one thing and now that you're in there, it's the opposite. Something totally changed your perspective on your belief of something and maybe changed how you operate today.
When I started here at Chicago Blend, that was back in 2021. That was a good year for VC funding rounds. I've always had exposure to tech, to finance, to this broader entrepreneurial community. Again, I've spent my entire career here, so none of this was really new to me. But I'm not a VC investor myself. So coming in at that time, just a year after the killing of George Floyd, mind you, being a DEI-focused organization, we had quite a lot of wind in our sails. And I had hoped that this would kind of be a sign of how things are going to be. There were lots of challenges that we experienced really starting in 2022, moving onward. Backlash, DEI, inflation. You had all the political stuff, the campaign that seemed to go on for years. So lots of other things that were injected, externalities that we don't control, but we had to respond to. And this was already very visible to us as we launched our fellowship program. So, we launched a program knowing like a lot of funds may go under. We
Right.
may be training people for jobs that don't exist,
Right.
right? So for me, I think being forced to confront these things, and maybe making mistakes of waiting too long or not waiting long enough, and timing, those are always things that I sometimes obsess over when I look back. But ultimately, you got to keep looking forward. You got to look at your mistakes, audit them. You got to be upfront with your board, with your team about it too, so you don't make those mistakes in the future. So, I can't think of one mistake that I want to highlight, just because, again, I feel like I've made so many, and most of them were just little things along the way, or just like things that just took me way too long to figure out. And now it's just second nature to me. But I think that comes with mastering any job, or becoming an expert in any field.
Right. It's really part of the process.
Yeah.
It's really part of the process.
Yeah.
All right. I have only one question left for you. I could talk to you all afternoon, but I have one question left. It's probably the most important question you've ever been asked, so I'm glad you're sitting down. It's an important question. I'm joking, but it's an important question. So it's more of a scenario. And the scenario is this, Joey. You are trapped on a desert island the rest of your life. Now you have food, you have water, you even have healthcare. Everything that you need is on this desert island, except one thing. One thing's missing, and that is entertainment. There is no entertainment on this island. But luckily for you, an old boombox drifts ashore with unlimited batteries. However, you can only bring one album to listen to the rest of your life.
Oh, man.
What
Okay.
album are you going to bring?
All right. So fortunately for you, I'm looking down, because I'm looking in my notes app right now, because I actually do have I started a best albums list. And I want to pull it up really quick. I like all of these. Yeah, I like all of these. Honestly, I'm such a huge fan of like music from the 80s and 90s. So think like Prince, Michael Jackson. This is the music that I grew up on. I'm a 90s kid, so probably one of those. But yeah, I'm looking down at my list. I've got way too many, so that's a pretty hard exercise.
Prince and Michael Jackson, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I appreciate about both of those artists, personal lives and controversies notwithstanding, is just their mastery over their music. With Michael Jackson, he understands lyrics and a good beat. With Prince, he played so many different instruments and was just such a musical genius. Truly, I think a genius in so many ways. And I appreciate, as someone who is not musically inclined, I never learned how to play an instrument. It's my biggest regret in life, one of them. But as someone who's not inclined in that way, I just appreciate people who just are really good at what they do. And both of those are the ones that immediately came to mind. Who's yours? What's your album?
Oh, I change it all the time. I change it all the time. I'm easily swayed because I love music. I'm easily swayed when I hear other people's ideas. But if I had to choose today, honestly, if I had to choose today, he doesn't even have a full album out. But Rome, I don't know if you've heard of Rome, but he was with Sublime with Rome, and now he's off on his own. And he has a new EP out. There's 5 songs, and every single one of those songs is awesome and very positive. If you listen to lyrics, you're like, oh, that's negative. Oh, no, he's saying the opposite. Like, his vibe is just so good. I can't wait till he has a full album out. But yeah, he has an EP out. He's great. And I'd go on a limb and do that right now with only 5 songs. That'd be a tough one. But I love music. So I love your response. And, you can't go wrong with Michael Jackson or Prince. That's for sure. Yeah.
Sure.
All right, Joey. Thanks for joining me on Tech Scenes. Great talk. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jeff.